Hello, good evening, good afternoon, good morning to everybody that is there present today from different parts of the world and the country. I'm Samruddhi Kothari, and today I'm going to be talking about how our changing climate and weather patterns are impacting our energy supply infrastructure. I'm also going to be talking about how these impacts on energy sources cascade across various sectors within our society and its implication on insurance organizations. Now, if I had to use a very quick and basic example to kind of explain how I've come about with this research um, and to kind of explain how the connections between risk, society, and insurance work, let's take into account our current situation of COVID-19. We know that it's a pandemic risk, which has led to shutdowns of restaurants. And because of that, it's directly impacting the livelihood of the restaurant owner. Now, let's assume that for safeguarding his revenue, the restaurant owner has purchased a business interruption coverage from an insurance organization. Now, because of that purchase of coverage, the insurance organization is actually obligated to cover some kind of loss of income or a loss of revenue to the restaurant owner. So basically, my research kind of works around this interplay of climate risk, socioeconomic impacts, and its implication to an insurance organization. Uh, the presentation is broken up into three sections, and the first section focuses on what the climate looks like in the future and how that impacts energy. If like we know that human activities and greenhouse gas emissions have led to an increase in temperature. Now, in United States, over the next few decades, it's actually projected that there is going to be an increase in temperature of 2.2 degrees Fahrenheit under whichever climate scenario you want to assume. And because of that increase in temperature, we are rapidly losing the ice covering in the Arctic. And because of that ice loss, the sea level rise is increasing, and that's increasing flooding. So basically, a lot of the coastal regions around United States are at high risk from sea level rise and flooding. Now, if we shift our focus to the southwest region of United States, the warmer temperatures are leading to a more drier climate and drought-like situations. So this is kind of creating a conducive environment for wildfire risk. In fact, in the future, it's actually predicted that there's going to be an increase in frequency and intensity of wildfire. And if I'm talking about all kind of climate risks, I mean, one of them is intense storms and hurricanes. It's actually projected that towards mid-century, there's going to be an increase in intense storms over Midwest of United States. Now, all of these are constituted or recognized as different kind of climate risks. Why do I want to understand climate risk for an energy source? We know that our population is growing, and the economic growth is also happening at a more increased and faster pace. So because of all these factors, there is an increase in energy demand. In fact, over the next 30 years, the energy demand is projected to increase by 80% worldwide. But the energy generation and delivery is getting severely impacted by climate change and extreme weather events. And what do some of these impacts look like? Now, if I had to take an example of intense storms, then they completely destroy a wind turbine. Or if there are even a few days of cloud cover and there's no sunlight, then that impacts the power generation capability of solar energy. Or if I looked at a coastal energy infrastructure, such as Turkey Point, which is actually a nuclear power plant in Florida, and that is considered to be at extremely high risk for inundation because of sea level rise. Now, all of these impacts aside, one of the most common impact that was observed across all energy sources has been a reduction in efficiency and power generation due to increasing temperature. And we all know that all of these impacts can lead to one outcome, which is basically a total or partial blackout. So going onwards to my next section, I'm going to talk about how my research communicated the cascade impacts of blackouts. Now, what do I mean by cascade impacts? It basically means that when an initiating event impacts one system, it may lead to a direct or an indirect impact on other dependent systems or sectors. Uh, just going by an example of Superstorm Sandy, nearly 8 million people were without power because of that storm. Businesses lost in tune of $20 billion because they had to suspend their activities. In fact, even the capital market was impacted in tune of $7 billion in losses because New York Stock Exchange had to remain shut for 2 days. So, I mean, these are just some of the direct impacts of a power outage, as an example. So, understanding and using this as a foundational knowledge, this slide kind of just provides a small sample of of the output of the kind of research that I did. In this slide, I have referenced how an outage impacts the telecommunication services and how that loss of communication affects other uh, and how they kind of affect and interact with other dependent sectors, such as business, transport, and financial services. And to further how I've gone on to explain some of the overarching type of impacts on these affected sectors. Now, for example, if I take air transport, then loss of communication could actually lead to delays in flight landings or flight takeoffs and actually rerouting of flights. Now, there's a funny incident that happened that actually I realized, which was personal, that I actually realized when I was working on this research, that it was a few years ago and I was flying from Mumbai to New York and further from New York to Cancun. Now, my flight from Mumbai to New York had a layover in Brussels for 3 hours. But as soon as we landed, I think within 30 minutes, there was a grid failure, which led to a complete breakdown of communication. So, in short, no flights were taking off and no flights were landing. I couldn't even get in touch with the airline that was going to fly me from New York to Cancun to let them know that I might miss the flight and to rebook me. So, what happened was I was stuck at Brussels airport for 12 hours. And because I was a no show in New York, I had to rebook my flight from Cancun to New York and actually rebook the entire sector. I lost one night at the hotel. So this kind of was just my own experience of how the cascade impact worked. And luckily for me, I had travel insurance. So the insurance company kind of covered some of my losses, but I also had to absorb some losses because of that. Now, the previous slide was just a small snapshot of what the output in my research contains. I have actually conducted similar kind of breakups for other sectors, as I mentioned in these slides, such as healthcare, financial services, transportation, water, and wastewater systems. Now, understanding all of that and using that as foundation, I kind of wanted to understand how does this play out in the real world. So as the title suggests, the next section is going to focus on a case study of wildfire risk to transmission and distribution assets. To quickly explain what transmission and distribution assets are, they're basically power lines that transport electricity. Now, you will find transmission assets mainly far away from civilization. There are those large steel structures that you might find them on the freeway with power lines. And distribution assets are those that are close to our homes and businesses. They are power lines on wooden poles. And just as a background and context for this research, I'm just going to touch about what happened in California in the year of 2018 and 2017. We know that they were devastating in terms of wildfire. In fact, the wildfires were caused by some of the deadliest and the costliest wildfire in California in these 2 years were caused by faulty power lines. and they had spread far and wide because of strong winds. We also know that nearly 100 people died, and it destroyed about 30,000 structures, whether they were residential, commercial properties, industrial, and so on. And the combined cost of both the years was nearly $43 billion. And the majority of this cost actually constituted of suppression cost, property damage, and business interruption. Going forward, it's just going to get worse. In fact, if I get your attention on the black arrow, that kind of shows basically in the future, that is late century, uh, up to the year of 2100, it kind of shows that most of northeastern California is considered at high risk from wildfire. So this kind of just provided a basis of my case study, and I wanted to understand how the cascade impact fell, like kind of build a flow chart for a wildfire event. So the idea behind this flow chart is to be able to predict possible outcomes due to an event. Now, how did I come up with this flow chart, and how would I use it in the current scenario? Just to give you an example, we all know that wildfire season in California is going to start. And currently we are in the midst of a global pandemic. So if I had to look at compounding impacts for wildfire on our respiratory health with the effect of COVID-19, it's actually going to make the population more vulnerable for catching the virus. So, I mean, so what's going to, in the end, it's just going to increase morbidity and mortality because of respiratory illness and COVID-19. That's going to severely strain our already burnt out healthcare sector, and it's going to have a devastating impact on our economy. So this is kind of basically how I had envisioned that I would use this flowchart by expanding it to include compounding risks and its associated outcomes. And now going forward, going back to the focus on the case study, the key findings, especially focused on insurance, were that premiums have already risen and they're going to further rise in California. And a lot of insurance organizations have stopped insuring houses in high-risk areas. Now, some of the solutions for this is that the property owner could actually undertake outfitting his house with fire-resistant roofs, or creating defensible space such as prescribed burns to protect his property. Or the government could actually create more programs that could be like a last stop shop for ensuring that the property is insured. I mean, some of them are already there, and they're great programs, but we don't know. But they also kind of create a strain on the tax revenues for the government that actually could be used for other things like development of open spaces, or actually using them in fire suppression and mitigation measures. Now, this was kind of just an overview of what my research entailed. Why was this research important for me if I looked at it individually based on the three stakeholders? Was for energy organizations, I'm sorry, I don't know what's going on with my presentation. But if I kind of looked at energy organizations, it kind of provided them an opportunity to look at other avenues to mitigate risk, such as building more climate resilient technology or renewable energy. If I'm looking at the government, then the cross-sectorial impacts kind of helps them understand to inform better and effective policies and take appropriate adaptation measures. And for insurance organizations, there is a need to integrate these cascade impacts to strengthen their risk modeling capabilities. Now, also as a part of my research, I had explored the landscape of innovative financing methods and alternative risk transfer methods, but only kind of with respect to the case study, with my wildfire case study. So that was viewed as kind of a risk mitigation solution for all of these three stakeholders. But I still very, very strongly believe that instead of individual adaptation or risk mitigation strategies, I think all the impacted stakeholders should kind of come together to form a more collective action that can actually inform a more integrated and robust solution with only one overall objective of disaster preparedness. Now imagine, like, we know that currently the state budgets are stretched. The healthcare sector is under tremendous pressure, and we know that the government is understaffed, under-resourced, and the government employees are overworked. If I put in a climate disaster from the mix, I I don't even want to imagine what kind of recovery efforts, or how the recovery efforts are going to look like. I mean, it's just going to be crazy. So this was kind of an overview of why this research is important and what my research entailed. Talking about why this is important to me is because I have a future vision to kind of um, look at that our future energy generation is only going to depend on renewable energy. And for that, I need to understand two very important things: that what the financing mechanisms look like, and how climate policy measures kind of motivate investors to invest in renewable energy. So for me, in the near term, I would like to actually take this research forward at a more granular level, kind of what I did with the wildfire case study, where I focus on one weather or climate event with one energy source and its corresponding socioeconomic impact. And if that definitely doesn't work out, you're probably going to see me trying to save sharks in some part of the world. And so I warning the faculty that you're probably going to get emails from me if my plan A doesn't work out. And last but not the least, I would like to thank all the people that made it possible. That is my faculty advisors, Anne and Bora, my practitioner partner, Mackie McLeary, without whom this capstone wouldn't have been possible. Sarah Emmenheiser, who's kind of been a support system in helping me navigate all the problems and issues that I faced over the last 2 years. Definitely my friends and colleagues in the 2018 CSP cohort. And last but not the least, I would like to thank these two special people who've been my support system, who've been my mentors, and who've been my guides throughout the last 2 years. And I'm so thankful to have met them, are Janet and Kevin Buck. Thank you everybody for listening to me, and I open the floor for questions.